Okay, well, let's get started. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon for our June meeting for CMDA. We're thrilled that you're here today. We'll start off with an update from Joe Tansey. And Joe, I didn't know if you wanted to do it with Chad or how you guys want to give us an update. There's obviously a lot to talk about today, so maybe we can kind of touch upon a lot of the new news. So, Joe?
Sure. And so I was going to let Chad do the update today, get started doing that. And so I see that he's on and finished his presentation with CHCA. So I'll let him take it from here.
Thanks, Joe. Welcome, Chad.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I just got done talking for about an hour and 45 minutes or so. So this will probably be a short report. Just want to let the group know that, we're continuing to do increase the number of recertification surveys that we've been completing. And with that, we're going to have to do some staggered surveys along with that process. We've been asked to do a number over the last so many months of infection control surveys. And we're finding that we're having fewer and fewer of those that are required for us to go out and do. I think we're seeing a significant downward trend in the number of facilities that have had outbreaks. And it looks like that when outbreaks occur, we are seeing 1, 2, 3 people with, testing positive with the virus, whereas before we were seeing, 20s and 30s that constituted the outbreak at the facilities. So, I'm not sure what other information I can provide, but just wanted to give you an update on the kinds of things that we're doing and going out and, doing our best to ramp up the survey activities that we need to do. We've got some catching up because of the COVID pause, the pandemic pause, and I believe we're probably going to be putting a plan together to share with CMS with how we're going to get all that work done.
Well, thank you, Chad. Chad, can you explain more what staggered surveys means?
Okay, sure. So that's going to mean that a certain number of facilities, 10% of our facilities, we have to go out in off hours, whether it be holidays, early morning, later in the evening, or on the weekend, so that we can, kind of, I guess, capture the totality of care that's being provided, not just what happens Monday through Thursday, 8 to 5 or 8 to 6, whatever that is. So, yeah, so we have to do 10%, which would be about 22, 23 facilities.
Okay, thank you. And then, there's big news from the governor's office with the new public health order and the new rules that CDPHE had put out for nursing homes with the RCF. Are surveyors now starting today going to be surveying to those new expectations?
Yes. So whatever the guidance is now, we will be going out and, expecting that. I think, I haven't been able to see the updates yet this morning. So, if it makes sense that we have opportunities for facility to come up to speed with certain things, we've been able to do that in the past, where we've been able to have conversations with facilities and, what is this going to look like when it involves a process to roll out, a change in facility practice versus now here's the requirement and here's the expectation. So, depending on what that looks like, if it's a continuation or a step down of something that's already in place, it's easier to have that expectation than if there's something that needs to be rolled out as a plan.
Okay, great. It'll be nice to know that facilities have some time. Go ahead.
And I wanted to say, as with all public health orders, there are some areas where it doesn't quite match up to what CMS expectations are. So we're going to be reviewing that and try and figure out how we're going to how we're going to do that and incorporate that with our survey process, because we know that there are differences. So we want to be fair. So we'll figure that out as we have a chance to review it more. So.
Thank you so much, Joe. There's a very handy little sheet that they gave us from CDPHE where it says this one you go with CDPHE is stricter and this one CMS is stricter. And we can send that out to our CMDA members after this meeting, along with the public health order and the updated RCF. So we'll plan on doing that for sure.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much. I think it will take us all time to absorb it all. So thank you. Does anybody have questions for Chad or Joe? Okay, it's kind of quiet. Next, I wonder if Erin Thomas is on yet. Erin, if you want to unmute yourself, if you're on. Okay, I know she was going to try to jump on, but Erin Thomas has a new job and we wanted to really thank her for all of her investment, time, energy, expertise that she's given through CHCA to our community. She's really been so extraordinary and so generous, and we wanted to show our gratitude today. So when we see that she's on, we'll thank her again, but we wanted to take this moment to celebrate her work. So thank you, Erin, and we look forward to thanking you again. All righty. Now we're going to move on to our presentation. We're incredibly honored and lucky to have Dr. Hillary Lum here to present to us about the Colorado MOST form. She's worked diligently on the MOST form and really is an expert in this area. We are so grateful that she took time today to come and talk to us. So it's really fantastic that she's here. We want to thank her. And then we also want to make sure that she can share her screen. Hillary, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It is great to be here. I'm hoping I can share my screen. It looks like it's going to be coming soon.
You should be able to do it now.
Okay, perfect. Not quite yet, but the other thing I can do is send the PowerPoint to you. Oh, it looks like it's working. Okay. Are you able to see my screen?
Yep, it's perfect.
Okay, wonderful, thanks. I recognize some names here. Thank you again for time on your agenda. I am one of the geriatricians at Seniors Clinic at UC Health, and also I do telehealth as one of our VA Rocky Mountain Regional Medical Center geriatricians, telehealth to older rural veterans and their care partners. One hat that I wear and how I'm here today is as our one of our representatives to the National POST, which the Colorado MOST is part of. And Carrie Levy has recently joined as the long-term care advisor to the National POST. So there have been a lot of different conversations nationally and then also locally that we have been part of and have observed as questions come to us. So we thought this was a great opportunity to have a bit of a discussion about Colorado MOST use in long-term care. My presentation is brief. I welcome conversation comments into the chat. And I believe you also received a one-page tip sheet that will again share out if you didn't receive it. So just by way of background, the Colorado MOST form was established in 2010. Several of you may have been part of the Colorado Advanced Directive Consortium that was really critical in helping to move this piece of legislation forward and bring the MOST form to Colorado. It was revised by a group of stakeholders, including individuals involved in long-term care in 2015. So the current version is housed at the Center to Improve Value in Healthcare since 2018, and Civic also serves as the administrative home for the Colorado MOST program. I'll point out in particular that once a month, there is an advanced care planning stakeholder group. We welcome any and all of you to join us, and I'll have Kari DeJournas's email is on that tip sheet, and her email is also part of this presentation. I'm also happy for Leslie to share out these slides if there are any resources that you want to make sure that you capture. So please join us for ongoing discussions of how the Colorado MOST is being used in long-term care as well as other settings. We know that a lot of us are aware of it, and we know that as it has been implemented, we're also wanting to raise awareness about appropriate use. And I'll sort of define where I think the leading edge for that is. So as a reminder, the Colorado MOST form is a medical order set. The orders are immediately effective after a discussion about the MOST, and the MOST form should align with advanced directives. I've highlighted 5 things that we want to really emphasize and know about the MOST. First, of course, MOST is more than just a form. It's a tool that translates our advanced care planning or goals of care conversations into medical orders. So it really is a way of having a portable document that represents the preferences for care of an individual. And we hope that the advanced care planning conversations that contribute to the choosing of particular orders are based in a shared decision-making conversation with the appropriate decision makers, and has a holistic perspective of the person's diagnosis, their current state, their prognosis, and some counseling about risks, benefits, burdens related to the different treatment options that are part of the MOST form. So who can have the conversation? This is going to be well known to many of you, but we do want to emphasize that it can be many different members of the long-term care team. So hopefully many of you have operationalized this in flexible ways that fit the nature of the staff and who you have trained within your facilities. And then, of course, there needs to be a warm handoff in the interdisciplinary team where then an MD, DO, APP, so a licensed independent provider, then signs the MOST form. So we wanted to pause and remember that the MOST form is not an advanced directive. This brief figure hopefully reminds us that for individuals who desire the standard of care, full treatment, an attempt at CPR, transfer to the hospital, no document is needed. Then there are a group of advanced directives here noted as legal documents, which can be the medical durable power of attorney, could be a living will. There are other names here where we often may be using attorney prepared documents or the 5 wishes, or recently you may be aware of Prepare for Your Care by Rebecca Sidori out of UCSF, which has been translated into a number of different languages and may be a preferred, easy to read document for your patients and their families. And those types of legal documents are different than the medical orders, which are the post forms, or here in Colorado, called MOST, Medical Orders for Scope of Treatment. Certainly, we also have the sort of single order, do not resuscitate order here in Colorado called the CPR directive. So we feel that these are highly complementary documents. And as Carrie Levy also knows from the VA perspective, then we have to also think about how we integrate sort of health system specific order sets to then potentially also community-based order sets like the MOST, and then also advanced directives. So it is a confusing landscape. I think our patients and residents and community members may feel that they are perhaps, quote, done with their advanced care planning process if they have completed one of these documents. And yet that's not necessarily the whole conversation of what is needed or what would be appropriate. So this will be a reminder of how we can sort of lay those conversations out and be teaching our staff and reminding ourselves, you know, the differences between an advance directive and then the MOST and the POST form. So here's another table that sort of calls out some of those differences. And I'll emphasize some of these points as we go along, in particular as they're relevant to our long-term care setting. So who needs an advance directive? All competent adults would be appropriate for a medical durable power of attorney, potentially a living will if they choose to want to document their preferences in advance. Whereas there's guidance nationally that the MOST form is appropriate and intended for people considered to be at risk for a life-threatening clinical event because of serious illness, limiting medical condition, chronic medical conditions. So we really wanted to identify that. And then you can also see here that the advanced directives can be completed by the individual. In contrast, a MOST form or a POST, similar to the CPR directive, needs to be discussed in the context of shared decision-making with a medical provider who knows their overall situation and also signed by that individual. So I mentioned that Civic is the administrative home for the MOST program. There is an email where individuals across Colorado ask questions about the MOST program. A frequently asked question is, where can I download the MOST so that I can sign it to have it be completed? And those questions are being asked by a community person. So then we will reply back and show them where the form is and encourage them to have the conversation with their medical provider. So we walk this fine line of wanting the MOST form to be available so that individuals have a chance to look at it ahead of time to understand what's on it. And then we also want to educate that it's very important to not complete the MOST form like as an individual without medical discussion and decision making. So another way of thinking through like what form is appropriate for a person in terms of where they're at in their life trajectory or their diagnoses is shown here. So you can think about how for all adults, we recommend completing an advance directive. And then it's only after being diagnosed with an advanced illness or frailty, regardless of age, that individuals would then be appropriate for completion of a POST form. And then of course it should be revised and updated as appropriate. I'll point out here that another community-based challenge that we see is that MOST form is being handed out in the context of admission to a facility, which I'll come back to again, or say as part of a annual welcome to Medicare visit. We discourage that. We discourage use of the Colorado MOST form as sort of the be-all, end-all encompassing form to encapsulate someone's preferences. It's actionable orders that take place, are to be followed immediately upon completion. And it has a number of missing components. It doesn't help identify who the medical decision maker would be. And it is very specific to certain medical situations. So you may find that individuals have had a MOST form completed sort of out of context of perhaps where they are in their own life trajectory. So a third point that we feel is important enough to specifically call out. Most form is not for everyone. I just gave you sort of 2 or even 3 examples of how a most form is being, I would argue, overused. So in some situations, I think it's appropriate for us to consider de-implementation of the most form. We want to emphasize, and this is aligned with national guidance, that it's appropriate for individuals who may have limited life expectancy, or at least, I think clinically, I think of it for my individuals who, perhaps regardless of life expectancy, are at risk or more likely to experience care transitions where perhaps their preferences, their values would direct to not want those care transitions. So if I have a patient I'm seeing who has experienced a lot of hospitalizations or readmissions, then I would feel it's appropriate to have a conversation about their preferences related to those conversations. And if they are in a place of readiness where they know that they would not want to be transferred to the intensive care unit if the medical situation has that on the table, then that's the appropriate person to be discussing the most form with. So a few points just related to why we really want to target most to the intended population and not overuse it. We do feel that if we were to complete a most form on everyone, healthy older adults, I think that this is a missed opportunity for us to actually be having the person-specific, complex shared decision-making conversations about, is hospitalization aligned with what's important to you? Is transfer to the intensive care unit what's important to you? It's very relevant to long-term care. We've noticed this a fair amount in Colorado, and for those of you who have maybe already done the survey that we've disseminated out, we are wondering how often most form is required for admission to assisted living residence or to a nursing facility. By law, the most form is voluntary. A person can be offered it in the course of their care, including at the time of admission, but it cannot be required. And I'd be very open to comments and discussion about where this requirement is coming from. And for you as a medical director, if you are experiencing that requirement, how can we best navigate? What are the opportunities for education? What are the opportunities for perhaps change in policy? Or nationally, we also wonder, can we equip those of us on the front line with processes for quality metric or quality assurance, setting up QI processes so that we know that these advanced care planning conversations are happening well, where individuals are, able to exercise autonomy instead of having the most form being required. So certainly as a corollary, most form not being required at time of admission, we certainly also don't need to require an update to the most form, sort of just on the facilities sort of paperwork. The fifth point, 5 of 5 points, most form is not a code status order. We have also heard stories, not just in Colorado, but we did a survey of POST representatives from across the US to understand whether individuals were aware of the POST or MOST being used as a code status order in their facilities. And a fair amount of states actually did report that it was fairly common or common to have this form being used as a sole code status order. A few of us who are part of the POLST Assembly actually recently wrote a special article that was published in JAMDA. My thanks to Susan Hickman for her leadership in a lot of POLST related research, as well as of this article, which is available free. She paid the open access fees, so all of us are able to download it. And if it's helpful to you in your teaching or education, I really commend it to you. I note here one of the tables, so we were trying to call out some of the problems that can arise if a MOST form is used as a code status order only. And it can be related to perhaps a facility culture of urgency of documenting code status. There are probably a lot of aspects that feed into that. It is notable to us because we want to have confidence that we're having holistic conversations, even if they are done in a timely and fairly expeditious way, that the conversation still is up to date, involves the right people, and reflects what the resident wants. We also wonder if there's sort of a use of a single tool, i.e. the MOST form, to document the code status, which then, if the rest of the MOST form is blank, so if sections B, C are not filled out, that we see as a missed opportunity to have sort of a fuller documentation of someone's preferences. And we could even perceive, oh, the MOST form is quote unquote done. We don't need to discuss more about what's preferred related to hospitalization or not, because we see the green sheet in the chart. So that's another sort of cautionary observation we've made if a MOST form is used simply as a code status order instead of a separate process. We also wonder if some nursing home companies or surveyors or other stakeholders are perhaps even directing facilities to use the POLST for code status order. And so I'd love to hear whether you're aware of policies that are recommending use of the MOST this way, because that gives us an opportunity to think through, are there opportunities for policy change so that there can be perhaps two separate processes, one for documenting code status and making sure that that's clear, and then appropriate use of the MOST form. Just a few additional points for MOST form use, which are probably a reminder and are all printed on the backside of that green paper. The MOST form does not have to be original to be valid. So the faxes and copies are legitimate and appropriate to be followed. It does not have to be completely filled out. So we discourage use of the MOST form as a code status order, and yet it is technically valid. So if form section B but not C is filled out, those forms are still valid. Third, relevant to long-term care settings, verbal orders for the MOST form can be given, and there's language that then licensed independent provider can sign within 30 days of that verbal order completion. Some of you are likely very aware of challenges with having a legally authorized surrogate or a medical decision maker being able to sign in person in the context of COVID. So Jen Kluss and others who are on the line from Civic, we have certainly been working to think through, like, are there opportunities for sort of Colorado regulation to allow for sort of verbal attestation from the patient/surrogate's perspective, not just from the provider's perspective. So that's a little bit of a tangent, but I wanted to bring that up also, that's something that we're certainly aware is a barrier, especially as more virtual health is being done and in-person limitations have encouraged us to try to find appropriate other workarounds. As I mentioned, reviewing is essential. These forms should be updated so that they reflect the person's current preferences. And here are some resources that we recommend through use. We recommend as the civic work group, and we're also working on building our resources so that the long-term care community, as well as other communities caring about advanced care planning, have go-to resources that they can use related to counseling for advanced care planning. And then our addresses are also here, and I think Kari will certainly put hers into the chat. And in fact, I see that she has, so that you can follow up with her, especially to get the invites to the stakeholder meetings. So I will go ahead and stop share and invite any questions.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much, Hillary. I having a kind of some echo, I don't know why. But if anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask a question directly, that we welcome you to do that. Or if you want to put it in the chat, myself or Singh can read it out. And what questions do you have? I know it seems that it's actually fairly common for facilities to kind of expect that every patient upon admission would have a MOST form. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts?
Hey, Leslie, this is Carrie.
Hi, Carrie, go ahead.
Hey, I just wanted to see, Hillary, thanks so much. That's really so clear. And I know there's some comments in the chat that folks are indeed using these, the facilities are requiring them as DNR orders and requiring them for all their residents. Is there any guidance to sort of change that or undo that? Or how have you seen how others have handled that problem?
I think we are in the needs assessment phase. So I am very interested from you all, where do you think this is coming from? Is it sort of a local culture where it's not actually written down anywhere, it's just something that we do? Or is it written down? And if so, we would love examples of that, including if they're redacted. You know, you can send them to Kari. We then wonder, well, that would help us to know what strategies we can use. You know, is this about education, and education to whom? Or is this about policy change? And in which case, you know, which policies do we want to make sure we address?
You know, in my experience, it seems to be definitely a culture, and I don't know if a lot of companies have it written down that this is mandated. It's unclear to me, but it's certainly the culture that everybody comes in and they get talked. You know, we talk about their MOST form, and we have that conversation, and everybody gets a MOST form, whether you need one or not. So it definitely seems like a culture as well. There are two questions in the chat, Hillary. I wonder if I could pose them to you. This is from Kurt. In the event of an apparent conflict, which supersedes the advanced directives, the MOST form, or the most recent document?
That is such a complex question. So let me spend some time thinking about it. You know, in the ideal world, of course, we hope that they are aligned, but you acknowledge that there's conflict. So I think my clinical opinion would be that I would look first to the most recent document. And if that's a living will or a medical durable power of attorney that changed something from prior, I would want to talk with the current people for the most recent document to understand more of the context. So why did this change come about? And really trying to hear the person's voice, because of it's also true that most recent documents should only be changed in the case of an advanced directive by a person themselves who has capacity. So if a MOST form has been changed, yes, a MOST form can be changed by a legally authorized representative, a medical durable power of attorney. And in that case, I would follow the most recent MOST, again, with sort of a thoughtful, hopefully slow thinking approach to understanding how and why were these changes made? What's the heart of the preferences and the values here?
Thank you so much. And then Singh Palat had said, advanced care planning is a requirement. The MOST has been a convenient standard way to, quote, prove that the advanced care planning took place. I agree with that. And Christine LaRocca said there's an error message with that genda link. So we can also share that link in another way. It's clear that we'll be having an email going out after this presentation. So we'll make sure that that link is also included. And I guess Hillary just put it in as well. Thank you, Hillary.
Hopefully that'll work. If not, we'll continue to work to find the right link.
Yeah, please let us know.
Right. Let's see, this is Christine. And is there an echo for other people?
Yeah, there is. Let me just mute myself and maybe we'll make it better.
Can you still hear me? Is that better?
Yep, I'm just going to mute myself again, and I think I make everything better that way.
Okay, I can hear myself echoing. But Hillary,
Still echoing.
thank you so much. I learned a lot during your talk. It occurs to me, I always think about what I want this form for myself. And, oh, that got better. How do you undo a MOST form, given how you describe how it's transmitted? So if you update it or revise it, but it's a healthcare professional's order that's open-ended with no end date, how does that work?
Yes, this is complicated, of course. So when I counsel individuals, I always, of course, emphasize and tell your people that there's the document, but I also hope that you have a person who can speak, what's on the paper. Because yes, technically we can void the MOST. I know UC Health is terrible about uploading voided documents. So it definitely gets complicated when we think about registries and how do we document that something's no longer what I want. Yeah, right. So I'm open to other people's thoughts on that, but I really think that we can void them. Voided documents in my ideal world would be able to be on record. And then I also think it's really important to have our trusted people know. And I know that some of our, hopefully more of our electronic health records will have a space for providers to document the updated advanced care planning goals of care conversations. So I can think about how the VA will have a time-stamped note, the Life Sustaining Treatment Initiative, where someone could update their preferences. At UC Health, we're having it. We also have sort of an updated advanced care planning discussion. I can't speak to whether Point Click Care and others yet have those updated advanced care planning documentation easily finded spaces.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that as well. Thank you, Christine, for that awesome question. It's a great question. Are there any other questions for Dr. Lum? I think that this is such a pertinent subject for our space. It's so imperative that not everybody has to have a MOST form, that it's really for a specific patient population. And I don't know if everybody was aware of that maybe until today. So this was incredibly useful. What other questions are there?
Dr. Lum, do you have an easy, I don't know if easy, but a simple way for our facilities to determine who should or shouldn't fill out a MOST form? Or should that be up to the provider to decide?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question, Singh. That was almost like a plant because I know you've participated in some of our interviews. So we are doing interviews to really understand from the provider perspective what would be helpful to us to think through who is appropriate for conversation that could result in completion of the MOST form and who's potentially inappropriate or less appropriate. I do think of, clinically, I think about individuals who have thought about their advanced care planning and have already made specific preferences. So I'll share my own caveat. I actually think it is potentially okay for someone who knows that they would not want to be resuscitated to complete a MOST form. If someone actually is like, they really know that. That's one type of person. I also think for individuals, as I shared before, who are at risk for care transitions, being in an intensive care unit, and have chronic medical conditions where this may not be aligned with what they want, I think those folks are appropriate also. I think one of the things that concerns Susan Hickman and I, if a facility is requiring a MOST form for everyone, and especially as we do a lot of subacute care, and that may include a lot of care for individuals who are quite healthy, but for whatever reason have their post-acute care in a skilled nursing facility, if they have a MOST form and yet have a prognosis, 15 years longer, we don't yet have the processes knowing that appropriate conversations will happen as needed as health changes. And so, that there could be someone who has a MOST form that's like 15 years old because perhaps it was done at the time of a joint replacement subacute rehab stay, as an example. And so that's where we're wondering if the MOST form potentially gets used inappropriately, potentially too much, and maybe being offered to someone, a patient, a client, a resident who's just not in the headspace of like, well, why are you asking me these questions? And I'm just gonna say something, but I actually haven't had a chance to think through what my preferences are.
I think that those are such important ideas to consider before we put it in front of every single resident. So thank you. Leah Watson has a statement. What is the legal precedent for who can change the form? MDPOA, guardian, family proxy?
So Leah, are you able to come off mute? Do you mean like what order of these people, or are all of these people able to change the form?
Hey, Hillary, great talk. Thank you for helping me understand this very confusing topic better. So I guess I mean, I think I understand the order of whom has precedence to change it, but I'm thinking, for instance, in a contentious case, let's say someone thinks they want to change the form on behalf of their loved one. Is there a legal standard that says that it must be a guardian, or can it be a fully, invoked MDPOA, and then how would you prove that? And again, I'm saying this in the context of something that is perhaps not aligned with all the stakeholders.
Yeah, and I think your example sort of reflects the complexity of that situation, because in the most straightforward situation, if we have the MDPOA as represented by the medical durable power of attorney form that was completed by a person when they had capacity to do that, that's durable. So only if that person stepped down would we ever need a legal guardian, where a court process happened and a person was deemed to be incompetent. So in sort of the ideal world, I would hope that there would actually never be an MDPOA and a legal guardian and a family proxy, like all in the mix. That would be my hope. And then I think from a proxy perspective, the way we make that actionable, at least in UC Health, is that's sort of based on an encounter, so based on an episode of care. There is any interested party proxy process to identify someone who is willing to serve as the decision maker for that healthcare encounter. And then yes, they could change the MOST form. I think then it gets very challenging, because then upon transition, to a facility, that proxy is not durable. And so then the residents, the facility needs to have that process again.
That's actually helpful. And you said a word here that is particularly relevant, which is that the most impulse really apply to an encounter or a specific time, and not for an overall sense of capacity for all decision making or for all competency, for sure. And I think a lot of people fail to perceive it that way.
Well, I actually am not sure I fully am following you, because the most, okay, yeah, this is tricky, because the most would actually follow to subacute rehab or to post-acute care, but the proxy would not, the person who set up the most form. There, I think that actually is a funny loophole there.
Yeah, I think it's all very confusing, and I have an example of it failing in almost every way in every setting. And I think what's helpful to me, which is what you said so eloquently, which is to keep the spirit and the heart of preferences always at the center. And I guess when I was referencing the encounter word, what I meant to say is whatever's happening at this time. So whatever the current health event or health decline is, should be what is considered with regard to wishes and decision making. And sometimes people want to bring back, something that happened 10 years ago that's completely irrelevant. So to keep people in the present moment. And then as to who can be legally defined if those decisions want to change, it's a crapshoot, seems to me.
Yes, I thank you for making that point, and I'll use it for a different reason. Like, that's one argument for me not wanting a MOST form that was completed 10 years ago. I don't want someone to bring that in, because it probably has not that much bearing. I mean, I need to check it and explore it, and maybe it's fully relevant, but more likely than not, it actually hopefully should have been revised a lot more recently than 10 years ago. And so, Dr. Weaver, can an MDPOA designate a successor? I'm not a lawyer. I don't know the answer to that. Does anyone else? So, and we're assuming that there was not an alternate, on the original document.
Does anybody else know the answer to that question? I do not as well.
Hey, this is Kari. So I think if the MDPOA is enacted and the person is deemed incapacitated, then there's the potential for naming a successor, but you might have to go through that proxy situation in order to do that. But again, not an attorney either, but that would be my take on that situation.
Thank you so much. Thank you again, Dr. Lum. It's been incredible, and I hope we can invite you back to teach us some more, because it's just been spectacular. So thank you again. We'll be sending out your slides with your permission, of course, and we actually have a handout for the MOST form, kind of an easy breezy, one pager that can help us sort through how to best use this document correctly. So thank you so much. Now we just have a few minutes, but we have another opportunity here for the CMDA elections. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully it's going to work. Let's see. Okay. And let's take a look. Oh, nope. Let's see here. Here we are. So I just wanted to let everyone know about our slate, which is spectacular. We are really lucky in the state of Colorado that we have physicians and PAs and practitioners who are willing to dedicate hundreds of hours on our behalf for our community, to make our community better educated and have resources that we desperately need to do our job well. And so for this year, for President Dr. Singh Palat, Vice President Allison Villegas, Treasurer Travis Neill, Education Coordinator, Galin Hartsuiker, Community Liaison, Chris Horton. And this year we're going to do it a little differently. We weren't sure how many people could make today because it's right after a 3-day weekend, and some people want to make it a 4-day weekend. I'm all for that. So we have a way for you to vote anonymously, and I'm going to put this into the chat as well. Hold on. Let's take
Leslie, I put it in the chat just now, or just a while ago.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Great. And so we welcome you to vote. We'll have voting open until this Friday at 12 noon, and then we will send you out the results. Everybody is running unopposed, so I like their odds. Does anybody have any questions about the elections for CMDA or anything at all?
Leslie, this is Carrie. I know there was discussion about a bylaws change, so that's not part of what we're looking at this stage.
Right, that's correct. There was a question originally from Dr. Gom about needing to change the bylaws. If we were to expand the board, we'll now be at 6 because the previous immediate past president is also a part of the board, myself. But actually in our bylaws, we had already made accommodations for that. So we're well within our bylaws to add a member to our board if necessary. And this election serves as the modification of that bylaws. And that's the way our bylaws are written as well. So there's no bylaw change, just a straight up voting of our slate.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay, well, please vote. We're excited about this. And then that change will take place after 12 noon this coming Friday. I do want to thank you all. It's been an honor to be a part of this organization. It's been one of the highlights of my life. And so I feel so lucky to be a part of this community. So thank you for the honor of being a part of CMDA all these years. Next, I just want to also point out that if you missed the annual conference, I can't imagine why you would have missed the annual conference, but there is still a way to hear really great people like Dr. Leah Watson, Allison Villegas, sing Palat. And you can get the recording, and this is how you do it. It's on your email as well. You can click on it. You'll have to pay for it, but you'll get everybody's presentation and their PowerPoint slides, and you can get CME credit as well. And so it's a win-win. And so please take that opportunity if you like. And does anybody else have anything else they want to add to our meeting today? You can just unmute yourself if you like. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing then. And all right. Well, I thank you all for joining us today for another CMDA meeting, monthly meeting. We look forward to seeing you next month. I believe is July 6th after another big holiday, but we will be here with bells on, looking forward to another educational center. Enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.